Hey everybody, it's Rothbard's Disciple here, and I am bringing you guys another video. Today's video is going to be on more philosophy. Actually, it's going to be basically completely philosophy. So we're going to be discussing discourse ethics. It's sort of the ethical arguments used by Hans Hermann Hoppe and Stefan Molyneux and Stefan Kinsella is another guy who he's pretty big in this area, I guess. But I'm going to tell you guys why I'm not really the biggest fan of their arguments. I think that the foundation that they've built is a good foundation, but their arguments they use a weak version of the argument. Okay, so I'm just going to explain to you guys a better argument than they use, and I'm going to explain to you guys why. So before we actually look at their argument, I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of a primer on what the discourse ethics of Hoppe and Molyneux and Kinsella, what they basically amount to. The idea of discourse ethics is that you can only really ask the question of what is just and what is unjust if you're arguing, okay? And there's a couple of logical consequences of this. The first thing is that even if you deny that you can, like, there are truths to morality, like this still, like, that's irrelevant, because like if you deny moral truths, then you can't ever argue that something is just or unjust. So that's fine. So like a lot of people will say, oh, this only is true if you believe that morality has truth values, and it's like, well, if you don't believe morality has truth values, then you can't ever argue that something is just or unjust. So you just have to live with the consequences. So the thing that you guys have to remember about the discourse ethics is that it's sort of set up as it's like logical kung fu, where it's like you can agree with me or disagree with me, but if you disagree with me, then you agree with me. So it's what's called a performative contradiction. Okay, and so the only way to argue against the discourse ethics is to say that, you know, there's no truth values either to arguments or morality, and if you say there's no truth value to arguments, then you can never say something is just or unjust, and if you say there's no truth values to morality, then you can also never say something is just or unjust. Okay, so it's logical kung fu. Anyways, so the issue that I have with Hoppe and Molyneux with their version of this argument, if we look at this here, and I'm going to quote Hoppe here, the first thing that I have, or the first issue I have, is they argue using flesh realities, and what I mean by that is they both basically talk about like you have to own your body, and they bring up the fact, like, you know, you have to own your body in order to sustain your body. You need, like, you know, food and water and things like this. So you need to have property rights over things that exist in the world. But my issue with this is that when they bring up the body, this makes the argument, it's no longer just a logical argument. You know, praxeology it's an a priori science. It's completely a logical science, just like mathematics. So for mathematics, you know, Einstein came up with his theory of relativity, and then they proved it through experiments. Okay, that's what praxeology is like. You can prove your theory through logic, and then you can, you know, experiment in the real world, and you should come up with, you know, similar results. Although the issue with praxeology is that experiments are never exact. So physics is or not physics, but, you know, mathematics, I guess parts of physics, is an a priori science, where, you know, all you need is logic. But the difference between physics and praxeology is that you can absolutely test exactly things in the real world. You can't do that with praxeology. So they have similarities and differences. But anyways, a true a priori proof relies on discourse alone. So if they both have to bring up the fact that, hey, we're human and humans need to eat food and water, it's like, that's not an a priori proof. I've never seen a mathematical proof that brought up the fact that's like, oh, hey, but we're human, so that changes the equation. You know what I mean? It's not like, because of the fact that praxeology is the logic of human action, it's not like a terrible argument, but it's just not a completely a priori and logical argument. So that the actual, or Yeah, the actual way that you want to do this, instead of just talking about, you can't exist with food, because there's other things that they say beyond, like, you can't exist with food. They go on to talk about homesteading, and they actually have decent arguments for homesteading. They say, logically speaking, the latecomers can't homestead first goods, and this is more of a better argument, but again, it still sort of relies on things to exist in the real world. And so what I'm going to show you guys here is that, like, all these things that they're trying to prove here, that you have ownership of things, like, not only of yourself but of things that exist outside of yourself, as well as the homesteading rule. And then they go further on to talk about how, if you cause damages to something, it's got to be objective. You can prove all of these things without having to use flesh realities, is what I call it, without having to use arguments about, hey, we're humans and humans have to, eat and sleep, and it's like that's not necessarily what you would call the strongest argument. And the way that you do this is that you actually use the scarce relationship of an argument to an entity. And so I know that's going to sound sort of weird, but what I mean by that is, any one entity, let's call our entity A, or let's call him Alice. Alice cannot argue A and not A simultaneously. Okay, so if Alice says, if her argument is 2 plus 2 equals 4, she can't say 2 plus 2 equals 4 and 2 plus 2 equals 5 at the same time. If she does say that at the same time, this is a performative contradiction, okay? And again, this is the entire basis of what discourse ethics is based on. It's the fact that you can't logically say two things that are contradictory, okay? So Alice can never argue A and not A simultaneously. Therefore, there's a scarce number of arguments that she can ever hold as valid, and that's why when you argue there can be conflict, I guess, in argumentation, because argumentation is just when you believe one thing to be true and somebody else believes something that contradicts what you believe to be true, and you have to figure out what the actual truth is. That's what argumentation is. Okay, so this is the scarcity from which libertarian or Rothbardian law is derived. Okay, it's not from the fact that it's like, oh, hey, you own, you're a human, and so humans have to own their body and be able to appropriate food. It's the fact that the literal act of argumentation itself requires you to hold an argument, and you can't hold all arguments because you can't hold arguments that contradict your own. Okay, that's the nature of argumentation. So there's a scarce relationship between a person and the arguments that they are claiming to be their own. Okay, and so this is important because when you're actually arguing, again, the whole point of argumentation, and again, the whole reason, or the whole basis of discourse ethics, it's all on performative contradictions, but the whole reason that you argue is in order to change somebody else's opinion. So if we're talking about, you have to have an argument that you have a property relationship over that you claim to be your argument, that's not enough for argumentation. You also have to have the ability to change that argument, okay? Or that would be sort of the justification for consumption, because obviously if you're arguing with somebody and they have, they're arguing to you that A is A, and then your argument is, or let's say they're arguing with you and their argument is 2 plus 2 equals 5, and you're saying 2 plus 2 equals 4. In order for this argument to make any sense logically, they have to have the ability to change their argument, okay? And so the ownership relationship, it's not only saying which argument you currently hold to be true, but it's also the ability to change this argument, okay? And so that's what ownership is. And so again, there's no flesh realities. I don't have to bring up the fact that we're humans and that we eat food and that we go to sleep in the night. It's just completely justified through argumentation. After all, this is it's called discourse ethics, so it should just be the ethics of discourse and discourse alone, okay? The other thing that you have to know about argumentation is that each participant has to homestead their argument. What I mean by this is you can't argue with someone unless you know what their argument is. So they could hold the argument that 2 plus 2 equals 5, but if they never tell you, or they, there has to be some way for them to display to you what their argument is, okay? So in order for them to own an argument, and the other thing you guys have to remember too is, I'm still not saying you can own an idea, but like there's an infinite number of people who can hold the argument 2 plus 2 equals 5, but for any one person, they can only hold the argument that 2 plus 2 equals 1 number, right? So for each person, that's the scarce relationship. So the people are grabbing like from the common knowledge, or from the common ideas that exist, the ideas that are true and false. They're grabbing certain ones, and they have to like show to the world, this is my argument, okay? And so if I'm arguing that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and you're arguing 2 plus 2 equals 5, I have grabbed from the common idea bank, I guess you could call it, or all the ideas that exist in the world that are true and false, and I have grabbed the idea that 2 plus 2 equals 4, and I'm saying it to you. And then once you have grabbed the idea 2 plus 2 equals 5 from all those common from all the common knowledge in the world, whether true or false, and once you have grabbed that idea and you say it to me, then we have both homesteaded our arguments. We have provided a direct and objective link through our labor to that argument, and it's through our saying it. You can write it down, it doesn't matter, it just has to be displayed in some objective way, okay? And so this is homesteading, again, derived completely from discourse alone. I don't have to bring up any flesh realities, all right? But moving on even farther, the real sort of linchpin and sort of foundational thing about the discourse ethics is it's not just trying to prove sort of how property exists. Oh, one more thing about how property exists that I don't have here, I guess, is the first user rule. There's a first user rule in homesteading, and if you talk about argumentation, if I am arguing with you and I say 2 plus 2 equals 4, and then you say 2 plus 2 equals 5, and then later on, some other person comes in and they try to start arguing that 2 plus 2 equals 7, and then this person tries to tell you that your argument is 2 plus 2 equals 7, like that makes logically no sense. There's obviously a first comer rule in terms of argumentation, because like you can't have someone join an argument late and then try and claim that they're now the person you're arguing against. Like that logically makes no sense. So the first comer rule, again, it is also covered in this completely logical version of discourse ethics that doesn't rely on flesh realities. The final things that I want to talk about here are the logical consequences of violent actions and estoppel. So estoppel is it's the idea that when you do an action, there's sort of an implicit argument in it. And so, like, let's say I steal from you $1,000. Logically speaking, I can't be upset. Like, I can't make any sort of claim that you have done wrong to me if you take that $1,000 back to yourself. And actually what estoppel says is not only can you take the $1,000 that someone stole from you and get it back, but you can also, after you've gotten your $1,000, you can take $1,000 for them, because the idea around estoppel is that the person who first stole the $1,000, they took $1,000 from somebody who had done nothing wrong to them. So when when their victim retrieves their $1,000, that's just returning the situation to normal. But since the criminal has already shown that they think it's okay to take $1,000 from this person when that person had done, or from the victim when the victim had done them no wrong, the logical consequence of this action is that after the victim is returned all of their money, the victim can now take the amount of money that was originally taken from them from the criminal, okay? And it's called the rule of two, okay? So this is the sort of final underpinning, or the final linchpin of Rothbardian law. Everybody within the libertarian world, they try and talk about like, oh, it's all about the non-aggression principle and don't do any harm to anybody. It's like, no, that's not Rothbardian law whatsoever. Rothbardian law it's an absolutely brutal, simple law to criminals, and it's like, the praxeological Rothbardian law. It's very simple. It's just the rule of two, and it's whatever crime you do, you can have a crime twice as bad done to you. And so the other thing, the final thing that I want to talk about, and the reason why I say it's brutal, because if you think about things in terms of financial crimes or like white collar crimes and stealing money, that's just logical and it makes sense. However, the one thing that you have to understand is that when it comes to violent crimes, that's where Rothbardian law becomes very brutal. Rothbardian law is unbelievably brutal to violent criminals, and I think this is a good thing because I feel no empathy for violent criminals whatsoever, especially when it's like heinous, and it's especially when you have a heinous violent criminal that Rothbardian law comes into play and can be terrible. So I want to go over just one quick example of how Rothbardian law can be absolutely heinous or not heinous, but it can be absolutely brutal to heinous criminals. So let's say you had a criminal who tortured, let's just say they tortured 5 people before, or like they tortured and killed 5 people, right? So the thing that you got to remember about Rothbardian law is that it all comes down to the rule of 2. And you might say to yourself, well, if you killed 5 people, how does the rule of 2 apply? Because you can't really kill a person more than once. Like that's what everyone thinks at first glance. But you can actually, it's the one scientific reality that I want everyone to remember is that you can kill a person and you can resuscitate them and you can kill them again. So let's say you had somebody who tortured and murdered 5 people. So a very heinous crime, right? Rothbardian law, what it says, the furthest legal extent that you can do to this person is double what they did. So since that person tortured and killed 5 people, you can torture and kill him 10 times. Okay, so I'm not I'm not a doctor, so I can't tell you what the best way to do this is, but I'm just telling you it is a possibility that you can kill someone and revive them, keep them alive for a while, and kill them again, and that would be a very good deterrent for violent criminals. So I just want to remind you guys that the logical reality of Rothbardian law, it's absolutely brutal to violent criminals. Okay, a lot of times people wonder where my sort of aggression for certain things comes from. It's because I'm a Rothbardian, and Rothbardian law is not. It's not the sissy version of libertarianism that most people adhere to whatsoever. But anyways, I'll try and keep this video from going too long, and I'll just stop it right here. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope I explained this pretty well, and I hope I explained the fact that Rothbardian law is not about the non-aggression principle. It's about the rule of 2, and the rule of 2, obviously, if you follow the non-aggression principle, you won't really run into any troubles with it. But the truth is, reality is a little bit more complicated than just saying follow the non-aggression principle. It's the reality of the situation for Rothbardian law is that punishment is decided by the rule of 2. Yes, things can go wrong. Yes, things will go wrong. Just make sure that your punishment is decided by the rule of 2, and then violent criminals they'll be weeded out really quickly. Like I said, Rothbardian law is absolutely brutal to violent criminals. But hope you enjoyed this video. There will be more coming out soon.